We have a lot of food baskets that go out at
I think
Thanksgiving.
you have to speak a little more.
Oh, you can. No one's ever told me they couldn't hear me. We're a very socially aware group. We have a lot of food baskets that go out at Thanksgiving and a lot of the bags that go out to the families for Christmas. We have youth programs here. We actually have some youth that are in there. And there's a strong, like Rich said, there's a strong core here that's fighting against the tide of whatever you want to call the yuck out there, and to keep us from succumbing to it. We have a food pantry, and also mention the breadth of things that we have. We have the XYZ Club, we have the men's breakfast. We do have activities and groups of people who can participate in.
So what's about in one word?
No, don't make me do it.
2 words. Well done. Anybody else? What do you feel that she's been talking about?
Or engaged, I think, engaged as best we can, not fully,
No, but
we are engaged, we're fighting back.
Yeah, yeah. That's good. Okay, thank you. Can we hear from this table then? What comes to your mind when you think of what you're proud of about this church?
It's a variety of things, so I guess I'll report it down here. We talked about the food pantry, and we felt really good about the families we affect through those programs, and that strong presence in the community. The building stewardship Roger mentioned feels good because we felt like we're being more proactive, and there's more involvement, broader involvement. George loves singing in the choir. He'd like to get a few more people to join him. And he's also looks at it competitively. So. Teen ministries, strong. We minister at a lot of teams. A lot of people show up, and it's a big class, and it's a good program. And just the various worship programs.
So it sounds like there's a lot of growth in discipleship. Is that the good word?
Yeah.
Being
Through the teen ministry especially.
Yeah.
In different Bible studies and so forth.
We'll come back to you. Can you add anything to that, or do you want to repeat what we just said, or add something different?
One I particularly find is that Thursday, the kids' choir.
There's a radio video, it was swear, she does a lot of stuff with the little kids. Like, chimes and singing.
She makes them sing.
Wednesday, because I pick one neighbor's little boy there, and he really grew in the community very seriously. And he really blossomed.
That's a lovely word, that people blossom. Should we put that down? It's a good place to blossom.
Particularly when
I mean, flourish is another word.
Yes.
People flourish.
oh, yeah.
Do you want to add something else?
No, I want to have programs for different ages.
Okay. So there's diversity then. Yeah. That's a posh word. Let's put diversity then.
What's that?
Diversity. Are you done? Is that okay on the positives? And something from you?
Well, we can echo that we, I also think it might be engaging with people.
Yeah.
That grows great satisfaction. I mean, with the food pantry that everybody's so proud of, enjoys, the people that come in and helping them. But we've also noticed there's a great commitment on the part of the people,
Yeah.
of the leaders, of the nursery school teachers, the people that help with the pantry, of the council members,
You're giving a lot.
yes.
So commitment, there's a lot of positive commitment.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so that's lovely. Elizabeth,
Shall we now do another sheet of things that we would like to see happen that aren't happening, or we'd like to improve? Because actually, being dissatisfied is part of being a church, isn't it? If we were totally satisfied, we might as well just fall asleep.
so let's start with you then. So what would you like to see different?
I
More faces, different faces, not the same faces over and over again coming to the challenge, but to see more people challenging us.
Good one, good one. Anything else? That's fine. And from here, what would you like to see more of or different?
We would like to see
Less of?
less services. We have 3 services, which divides the people into whatever service they go to.
All right, so you think fewer services, more people at them?
Right.
Right.
Don't do away with it.
You said, okay, we're gonna ask.
Yeah? What was your thing here? Where are you dissatisfied? What would you want to see yourselves doing more of or less of?
What do you have?
Well, you know, there was a comment about the accolades. You build that program back up with the kids and the candles, and then the division in the services was a comment again, so that kind of seconds that, you know, less services thing, because, you know, a lot of people don't know people in the other service and so
So
forth.
you've got isolated groups.
Yeah, and then lack of a formal adult Sunday school program, because we have the 3 services, there's no real slot for an isolated, I just referenced my church in the Midwest where there's time for Sunday school and there's no service going on when that's going on, so.
So that's something to think about. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the stable?
Well, we agreed with them, how do we get to the people and bring them in,
Yeah.
because, you know, we see the same people all the
Yeah.
time. And sometimes it's hard to engage people so that the message that we're going here with sticks. But you brought up a good one, that people don't come here that often because church is only for when you need it, like for weddings and funerals. So,
Yeah.
you know, they're not here for the other
That's very helpful. Yeah. Because that makes me think that the church where I'm vicar and yours is very similar in a sense. A lot of the things you've said, Teresa has said in the church where I am. And all the time I feel that we're trying to move the culture from a church of people who turn up, you know, let's go to church. And there's so many now competing things, you know, like swimming and rugby and soccer and all the rest of it. And parents will say, well, if we force the children to come to church rather than going to the sport, we'll put them off church for life. Interesting, I heard a Muslim community recently saying we just can't find time for the kids to do the soccer because they've got to do so much learning about the Quran. So, you know, they're completely the other way around, and that's an interesting picture. So how do you become, you know, we use the rhetoric all the time of being a community, and yet you've told me that you're already 3 communities with the worship. And the community, you know, is something that is great, but it also is dangerous because it can cut you off. It's quite difficult to get into a community, isn't it, sometimes, because it can be very, very close form. Lucy can, so thank you very much for your help. So, about 30 years ago, it seems like a million years ago, I wrote a book called Transforming Priesthood, which is obviously within my culture, within the Church of England. So I'd say, well, if we want this kind of collaborative sort of church, then how will the pastor, how will the priest have to behave differently? Because, you know, we had a kind of running joke really that if you wanted anything religious, you went to the vicarage and you got a visit, or you got a baptism, or you got a wedding, or a sermon. You know, press the bell at the vicarage and you got what you wanted. Like going, as we would say, to the post office, you know, to buy stamps to put on envelopes, and that's how it worked. To be a church of people is a very different being, isn't it, altogether? And so we've gone through quite a long time of thinking, so what is the role then of the priest? And the word I came up with, that a lot of people have worked with, is presiding. So it's rather a grand word. Of course, presidents don't always have a good press, do they? But it's something about trying to preside within a community in such a way that everybody knows that they are disciples, and some actually are ministers. I'll just play with that difference for a moment. In the 80s, we all got excited that everybody had a ministry. And I think you used the phrase total life
Caring
ministry. Now, a number of scholars have looked at the New Testament in recent times and said, well, actually, we're all disciples, we're all followers doubt about that. But are we all ministers? And a ministry is a bit like, I'm sure you don't hang your washing outside like we do in England, but if you're going to hang your washing out, you have two poles and a piece of string between them. And you've got to have both poles, otherwise the washing falls on the grass. The one pole is the individual being called, like Samuel in the temple, like David being called to be king, like Jesus being called to his ministry. The other pole is actually the community saying, we call you for the time being to be the musician, or to be the administrator, or to be the reader, or to be the welcomer, or to be the teacher, or whatever. So you can't choose a ministry and say, well, that's what I'm good at, those are the gifts God's given me, and whether you like it or not, that's what I'm going to do to you. Because ministry is a mutual thing. Jesus never actually forced his healing on people. He'd always say, what can I do for you? What do you want? I want to see again, or I want to walk again, or I want to be forgiven, or whatever it is. So there is that sense of courtesy and mutuality, which is in the very heart of God, because we talk about God as Father, Son, and Spirit, and they have that dialogue of loving courtesy that flows between them. So the gospel is all about that kind of loving relationship. And that's, St. John said somewhere, they'll know we're Christians by our love, by the movement between us. So I think more and more that we need to be clear that we can't choose our ministry on our own. Our ministry's got to be something which is partly our aspiration, but something which is also given to us. Let me give you an example. In the Cotswolds, which is a very beautiful part of England, I was doing a talk like this, and one of the church wardens, one of the what we call the bishop's officers, said, well, I know what my ministry is. It's reading lessons in church. And everybody in the room said, John, you're rubbish at reading lessons in church. We can't hear a word you say, you speak too quickly, and it really is a waste of time. I'm really quite taken aback, But they said, what you are good at is welcoming people at the door and making them feel that they matter and that you're glad they've come. So do that and let somebody else read the lesson. and the other thing I think is also about giving a time to, it can seem like a very, if you say to somebody, be the coordinator for young people's work, people say, yeah, sure, yeah. And it's like a long dark tunnel with no light at the end. But if you say, we do it for 2 years with a team, and then we'll review it, I mean, in our church, somebody took that on because nobody else volunteered, and I knew it wasn't right. And after a year, it was very obvious it wasn't right. And we're able to say, well, thank you, Julian, for trying that, but obviously it wasn't right. Now, just come out of that with good grace. But when you get somebody stuck into a ministry for life or for eternity, the community can suffer, you can suffer, and the pastor doesn't know what to do. So I think, giving people a bit of a job description, a time scale, how many hours a week, who they work with, and the boundaries. I think we need to do a bit more of that, to be a bit more kind of professional. And that's why some of us have been revisiting a very old word in the church's language. It's a word from which we actually get the word bishop, but I'm just going to give you a bit of history. Certainly in the early church, there were all kinds of different words used for similar sorts of ministries. So nobody can ever persuade you that there's a clear picture in the New Testament of one word meaning exactly what we mean it now. But through the years, the lovely Greek word episkope, from which we get bishop, has got kind of run down to just meaning bishop. But actually it means a lot more than that. Episcope means literally looking over, watching out for, caring for, keeping the unity, keeping the faith. And there are 3 dimensions to it properly. There's a kind of the personal one. There's, I'll tradition, they don't wear big hats, do they? But you know, in our tradition, they always do. And you know, the Middle Ages, bishops almost became barons. I don't know if you've seen Blackadder. Is that something you've ever seen? Yeah. Well, you know, you won't want to meet a bishop in the dark, you know, because you're really in trouble. And we go to Durham, and Richard been to Durham, and on the main road, the A1, there's a big sign, big brown heritage sign saying "Land of the Prince Bishops." Can you imagine that? And we're proud of that. Well, you know, bishops lived in castles, and they had private armies, and they were landowners on a massive scale. A third of the territory in England belonged to, you know, bishops and monasteries and so on. No wonder there had to be a reformation. And yet, some of the personal ministries of bishops, very sacrificial ministry, has often been beautiful and important and really significant. But there are two other dimensions. No bishop can ever act on their own. They're all part of a college of bishops across the world, and sometimes they forget that. But even more so, episcopacy is an aspect of the whole church, watching out for the world. And we share in that. We are all part of the episcopacy, watching out for the world. And so holding those three dimensions of that word together, I think puts us into a different picture. And I've just got some notes to remind me what I was going to say about this. I'll just try and say this easily as I can. If you think of the whole church as sharing in this watching out for one another and for the world, the most important part of it, I think, in our society has got to be spiritual leadership. Those of us who are leading in any way in the church have got to be passionate about God, passionate about the blazing reality of God in the world. God has always got to be our obsession. We have to believe that we're absolutely loved by God, and therefore we can pass that love on to other people. Because, to be honest, if we don't believe that, nobody else is going to believe it. And I think that's part of the new understanding of church, in a sense. You can't, in our world, we have a joke called, we no longer have a say one for me vicar church. A say one for me is meaning, you know, when you're saying your prayers, vicar, you know, remember me, as if to say, I can't pray, but you know, you're paid, you can talk to God. A bit like Moses went up the mountain to talk to God, but that left everybody else behind. But you know, as if the Reformation never happened somehow. We can all read the Bible, we can all pray, we can all have a close relationship with God in our own way. And unless it's quite clear to people that the key people in churches actually believe that, well then we are really got a long way to climb up the mountain. I mean, let's just stop there. Does that make any sense to you, or does it sound a bit obvious or a bit scary? You know, I mean, when we worship, when we pray, when we come together, do we feel that actually we're all up for this, or is that something that we'd rather leave to the experts or the... Have a chat on your tables about it. What does it mean to say that we must all be passionate about the blazing reality of God? See what happens.